Good afternoon and welcome to United TV. My name is Kemal Erkan. Today is February 27th, Friday, and this is our 2 p.m. session, and we are going to cover a lot of new updates on some of the existing topics, some updates from what we are doing from United Medical ACO side, and get into the Leave Delaware moment, what's happening with Fortune 500 companies, and also looking into the Epstein files and getting the latest updates on Epstein's and what is going to change for all of us in terms of our relationship with different institutions and how one may be in liability or their liability would be, their reputation would be in jeopardy. So we are going to discuss those, and we are going to look into the State of the Union talk from this week with President Trump. So Phil is going to help me with today's questions. Phil, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
All right, we can start.
All right. And like you said, kind of cover a various amount of topics. So first we'll start with some local updates here with our UMACO family. Everyone who works here knows of Dr. Erkan. And he wrote an incredible book called The Tigrayan Electrician, Memories of My Father and His Beloved Motherland, which I was reading the summary of, and I was getting choked up. I mean, that is a very powerful story. But it was just picked up by Turkish AA, which is kind of similar to the Associated Press here in the United States. So that means it's going to get some pretty major international exposure. And Kemal, you helped translate the book into Turkish. So what does this kind of recognition mean, not just for Dr. Erkan personally, but for the larger conversation around this story?
Well, one is when we are doing anything like this, we are looking for some recognition. So when that recognition goes beyond the local level and not just the nation, but now we are getting international attention to the issue, and this is a real story. Mm-hmm. So this is not a novel. So it's like actual something that really did happen in the 70s in Dr. Erkan's life and with his family. So we wanted this to be heard from many people, right? So when this is not about the family issues, so this is about what is happening today in today's society, what's happening in Ethiopia and Tigray, Eritrea, and certain dynamics where those things are actually originated from, and if it can be helping those individuals who are going through those troubles today, and also getting some attention for people to hear the real life impact of what has been happening. So this is one of the things when when Dr. Erkan wrote the book in English, I was also part of that in the edit process. And as you said, it's like going through the book without crying is impossible. So then the only other thing that I felt like I could do more is just translate that to Turkish. And that's what we did.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. Like, it's not a Hollywood story. This is a real,
a real story,
personal tragedy, that happened specifically to Dr. Erkan and to the region. And those stories are often overlooked, especially, in that area because it's not wealthy with oil or minerals. And so you don't kind of hear about among some of the other tragedies in the world.
Absolutely. So, and also, like, there's also some hope, right? So if you go through all that, there's like not just one message from this. So there are several different things, but I think what I would say is that, one, for me personally, knowing someone goes through all this trouble and still establish this beautiful family, and he's doing a great business. He's one of the most successful surgeons. So that means we can't really blame our past for our failures today. So I always say this to people. So then sometimes we make choices, whether we want to be in depression, lifetime, or do we want to really get out of that. So people who read this book is going to find that message and see that someone who went through all that trouble is now in one of the most successful bariatric surgeons, general surgeons in the United States, therefore in the world. And 4 kids, they're all in best colleges in the world again. and beautiful family. So that means there's hope. That's one part of it. The other part of it is what certain organizations do in the societies that we live in, what impact they have. So this is with the Nobel Prize Committee we went through, and how someone like Abiy Ahmed got the Nobel Prize in 2019, and then he destroyed 5 million people's lives. And then now with the Epstein files, now what we know is that there are a lot of dirty business behind this. So then it's kind of some validation that you now know that you weren't that wrong when we were going after Nobel Prize Committee. So we tried to sue them, but no lawyer wanted to take the case, including my next door neighbor. So because everyone is like, oh, no, we can't touch, but now it's touchable. Yeah. So and if others are reading it now, people in Turkey, there are 85 million, maybe more than 85 million, is going to read this, or some part of it at least. So we want to increase that awareness, and hopefully this is where we are today with the book.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely, there's power in storytelling, and you hope to use that, for kind of cultural diplomacy. And it really kind of speaks to the platform that you're building here. And so expanding on that, the YWCA Delaware has launched the Resilience Fund with a goal of raising $1.5 million by December of 2026. And that's going to support safe housing, offering 24/7 survivor services, economic empowerment, and leadership development. And you are chairing the advisory board, and you made a personal contribution yourself to the fund. So can you tell us a little bit more about this initiative and why it's important for you to step up into this advisory role?
So these nonprofit organizations, number one, we are selective. So like not every nonprofit is the same. Like if you remember in the Epstein files, the Terramar, the company called, it's also a nonprofit. So it's a corruption, the brand of the corruption probably, but that's why we pick our nonprofit organizations very carefully, and we partner with mainly with Brandywine Valley SPCA, and then we have YWCA, we have Food Bank of Delaware, and we do work with Sunday Breakfast Mission. Now, one may say, why do we really need to get involved this much, right? So I can, sometimes I hear that from my friends, sometimes I hear that from my doctors. So what I believe in, like, we each have responsibilities in the society. So for the society to be peaceful, and also there is some dignity that we need to protect, so we need to get involved. We can't expect everything from the government. So that part is, to me, it's very clear from day one. So if I have whatever means, this may be financial, this may be influence, I want to use this as much as possible for these types of events. So when we started YWCA, we've been involved with them since 2012. But at the end of last year, when they came to me and then they said, hey, this is the new challenge, unfortunately with some of the changes that we have from the federal government, there are some cuts that they have, and one of the important parts for these types of nonprofit is being able to predict what's coming, and if they don't have any savings endowments, so then they are not going to be able to keep doing what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like this is preventing what may be coming on our way. So they want us to just do individual contributions, but I said, well, look, when we do this, people who really want to get involved, they want to have more accountability. So then let's set up an advisory board, and then let's bring some people together, even if they're going to do financial only, or if they're going to bring their influence, or the state officials. So you were part of that night meeting. So we have Lieutenant Governor was there. We have Sarah McBride, who's on the board, advisory board, but she couldn't make it that night. But Marcus Henry, Newcastle County Executive, we have our other business partner, and I can't thank Tim Vassell enough. He's the head of Highmark in Delaware, and he actually wanted to participate from Highmark standpoint. And then we have our physicians and Dr. John Agora, and I know our UMACO physicians are going to support at different levels, but this group now, there are about 14 total. We are able to probably generate enough momentum to hit that 1.5 million level. And we have about 12 months to get there, so hopefully we'll do it. So, and we, again, this is something that we have to do to keep the society in peace and protect people's dignity. So that's the only reason that we are there. And I know that we are just, this is not the destination, what we are doing. We are just the messengers in between. So, and this is what we have to do today. And, you know, I'm thankful that I'm able to contribute in different ways. And this is probably one of the most challenging ones. But we like challenges, so no problem.
Yeah. Nah, and it's, you know, like you said, a lot of those funds that the YWCA originally had, you know, were taken away from the federal government, and they could have just stopped there and you know, shut down the organization. But, you know, people need that help. And so people like yourself and other people on the advisory board able to come together. And like you said, you kind of look at it as, you know, not just your civic duty, but, you know, as a personal thing to help out your neighborhood here in Wilmington, you know, and then all the stuff that organization does, you know, to kind of gather those funds together to make sure that they can keep their momentum going. So we're going to zoom out a little bit, but stay here in Delaware and talk about the state here. Has definitely been making national headlines, but maybe not so much in the best way. The Leave Delaware movement has been arguing that there's corruption, bias, and judicial overreach within the Delaware Court of Chancery. I'd say the most high-profile example is Elon Musk, who has moved Tesla and his other companies out of Delaware after a court ruling. But recently, the Delaware Supreme Court reinstated his compensation package, and even Governor Carney has since said that it's really important that we get it right for Elon Musk or whoever the litigants are, and we're cognizant that there may be some things that need to change as more companies threaten to incorporate elsewhere. So Delaware has long been the gold standard for corporate incorporation. If the state starts losing that reputation, what does that mean long-term for the state's economy and influence?
So before I actually answer the real question, I do want to have a disclosure. So because of this book publication just recently with the another agency, I was just searching. You know, I don't sit and Google my name all the time, but I do time to time. So, and then since this week we have a lot of press coverage, I want to see what was happening. And I saw one thing, and I didn't realize if I said that, but apparently I did. So I said for myself, Delaware is who I am. So, and then I kind of went through the article to make sure that's what I said, and that is because that's how I feel. So 27 years, so I'm a Delawarean. Now, this needs to be in your mind when I'm answering this, because all these changes happened during the last election. We had a leadership change. We have a new mayor. Matt Meyer is, you know, he has his own challenges during this process, and he inherited some of the issues as it was happening, but he also perhaps wasn't able to manage certain things, like, you know, calling Elon who in a national TV. So when you have to work with these people, okay, so you can't do that. You can't insult the richest man in the world if that guy incorporated in your state.
Because it's not just symbolic. Elon leaving, you know, him leaving here has, you know, major fiscal implications on the state.
So, like, think about this way. I worked with Governor Markell in 2008. I was in his transition committee initially, and then I worked with him very closely. And I worked with John Carney for several years, and we are in touch now. He's the Wilmington mayor. So one of the things that we always try to do is bring business to Delaware. And bring business means sometimes we have to give tax benefits for those companies to bring their employees here.
Well, you need a reason for the
Right.
companies to come here.
So when you start a fight with someone who's not so stable, Elon Musk he's probably taking a lot of psych drugs, in my opinion, and I think maybe some days he's not taking it as much, the other days he does. And when he's off drugs, then if you hit him on the wrong way, he's going to come back to you. And he did. I mean, he's moving. Like, this is not a joke. So he is the richest man in this
I'll definitely say that's
planet.
one thing about him. If he has something on his mind, he sees it to the end, and because he has the money and the resources to do
Right.
it. So it's not
I
really
mean,
someone you want to pick a fight with.
Like he's bigger than most countries in the world. Like if he was a country, he would be in the top 15. So you are fighting with this because it feels good, and then you have the fame on some cheap TV channel. So no, like this is business, and we need this. So now the problem is our Court of Chancery. It set the standards for the rest of U.S. and it was, as you said, it was the gold standard for a long time. Now something changed in this time, and how this is being handled perhaps is not really efficient. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind that it's not one company left. It's several companies. Every day we get some news, and then there's an X account called Leave Delaware Now. We didn't have this one before. They're almost promoting by sharing all these. Well, maybe it's good that they're kind of doing this because then it gets our attention.
I mean, I looked at the website. It's a very well done website,
Right.
and it's basically showing companies how they can leave Delaware and where they could go and how much money they could save if they left. And
So that means what has to happen is the adoption of what's needed in the corporate structure has to be there, and then we cannot really just stay behind of that. The judge who's involved with these, it started with her. We are going to invite her to the show. We have some personal friends, so the Delaware being small is always good. So kind of, if you don't know them, you have someone who knows them.
Yeah.
So that's something that we are going to do. And perhaps we can ask directly what the real issue is. So the actual fight is from the majority owners, shareholders, and minority shareholders, and who's gonna actually, like, if the court system is siding with one versus the other. So, but the big issue is the balance.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it'd be fascinating to hear her perspective because there's critics that argue that aligning aspects of Delaware's corporate code more closely with states like Texas and Nevada, some of these states where these corporations are running to, it would tilt the scales toward billionaires and make it harder for ordinary shareholders to challenge conflicted deals or hold leaderships accountable. So do you see this legislation as empowering the most powerful players at the expense of everyday investors, which could possibly compromise the accountability standards that Delaware kind of has, or does Delaware need to evolve to remain competitive in this space?
I think the issue is not the billionaires versus everyday investors. It's the real issues, as I was saying earlier, if Delaware's legal system can modernize itself to just catch up with what's needed. Again, the balance is important, so you can't just go with one and forget the other side, because yes, maybe in that case you can bring these corporates in Delaware, but if you are not getting these investors, everyday investors buy-in, then you're going to lose in the long term. So that's why there has to be a kind of business-oriented but fair, balanced, well-balanced approach. So does this need some update and some modernization? Absolutely. And that needs to happen quick, because once this happens, then because right now Matt Meyer is trying to increase taxes, he's trying to increase a lot of other ways to keep up with the state budget, because these are all going to hit the state budget at some level, and we are going to feel it more and more as we complete the entire process with this. So it's a challenge, and I wish I had, like right now, I wish we had someone like Jack Markell, who was in charge now as our governor. This could have been handled differently, or John Carney was doing it differently. So, not very confident with the current Delaware administration, although we are, trying our best. Like, you can't really just, have personal feelings when you are in those positions. So we invited Matt Meyer for the State of the State speech here, and we were going to do the overview, which we have done for so many years. He's not communicating. We communicate with everyone else. So governor cannot have feelings. Governor needs to come and just be accountable and responsible for what he's doing, and then he needs to make friends. He does need people. So we have another election coming up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right, and the answer is probably somewhere in between. Like you said, you can't have the personal feelings, whatever you might feel about Elon Musk. You can't just not listen to his point of view just because you don't like him. The balance is somewhere in between, preserving the credibility of the state, while also evolving to modern law, so that all the companies don't run away. So as you mentioned, we're going to shift to the national stage in the State of the Union, where Donald Trump gave his speech on Tuesday, which outlined his policy priorities. It also drew some visible outbursts from Democrats, including Representative Ilhan Omar, and several Democrats who chose not to stand during moments recognizing everyday Americans. Moments like this, they definitely grab attention, and that's why Democrats do it, and that's also why Republicans force the issue. But do these reactions help energize a base, or does remaining seated during recognition of veterans and families risk alienating moderate and working class voters?
So the politics is a dicey area. So not everything is the way it looks. It's almost like a theater, right? So there are, I have been saying this for a long time. So two groups, 50-50 almost. So one believes in one thing, the other one believes in something else. It's so interesting because I also watch the global politics as well. Turkey is one, but Europe and others. So someone agrees on something, one party agrees on something today, and let's say the ruling party does something aligned with what they were supporting, the opposition was supporting, and then 2 months later, they're like, nope, we are not agreeing with this anymore, just because someone else opposition is doing this, right? So if you're on the other side, you can't really, so this whole thing with I personally don't enjoy Ilhan Omar, right? So, there's AOC is similar. Those two kind of, but we all know their names. So that means they are doing a good job in terms of their show, because how many other people's names are visible? Like, if Ilhan didn't do that, we wouldn't be talking about her today.
Yeah.
So that's the story. So that's popularity is for them. It's important. It's a national popularity. So we talk about them in Delaware in a local show. Why? It's because we saw that. So if they were to just follow what President Trump was doing, their people were going to say, so you are just agreeing with him now. Right. So that's not really, you have to kind of take these with a grain of salt. So you can't just, okay, look, one part of me said, you know what, let's just bash her and just say, how dare she did this. But then realistic part of me says, hey, this is politics. So they're on two different edges of this politics. They're not even close in the center. So of course she's gonna, or others are not gonna follow him. But it was kind of to give Trump some credit. So he did set them up. Yeah. So was it fair? Who cares? Doesn't have to be fair. It's politics. So when they go after each other, that's going to happen. And perhaps the nicer part of this was no one got arrested after that. Yeah. Right? You call the president killer, and you still keep your job. in the Congress. So that's that's I guess the beauty of this country. So we still can, do those types of
Yeah,
things.
you
and
definitely
get
can't
away.
do that in every country.
Not in every country. So try and try that in Russia. So you'll be finding yourself in the news that you fell from your hotel
Yep,
room,
yep, yep.
like from the sixth floor. So there's so many people.
Well, I think there's a perfect meme or image that shows like a person standing in the center, and then it says left and right, and they don't move, but then it keeps moving further left or further right,
Hmm.
and then the person on the other side is like, hey, why are you so extreme? And they're like, I haven't moved.
I
And
have
there's you think back to politicians back from like the 80s and 90s, who may have been liberal or conservative, and then you look at their positions now, and you would think that they're extreme the other way.
So they didn't change much. Like the game of politics didn't change. People did change, but the politics, you probably saw this. It wouldn't be just me. So all the former presidents, you see them in the same kind of like the kind of like a club type of gatherings, and then they're Democrats and Republicans. And you look at them, they're like extremely friendly. And then you like, what happened? So I thought you guys hated each other. So they don't hate each other.
No.
So, I remember in the old days, and then it still happens in like Turkey in the parliament, the two parties, they're fighting like really like going crazy. And then at lunch, they're having lunch together. So you kind of really need to understand that part. So the politics, how it's being managed, honestly, Trump knows which buttons to hit, and he's hitting them left and right, and then you need to be kind of more clever to deal with him because he's smart.
Right. Exactly. He's setting that up, for them to have that reaction. And it really, it kind of raises a bigger question about the state of our country. If members of Congress, like you said, can't even come together to have lunch, what message does that send about whether unity is even possible?
Well, I don't know how true that is, because I remember Tom Carper right behind President Trump in the Oval Office. I think it was in 2019 or 2020, and they are all friends. So I don't think like what we see is the stage theater. It seems like, but I'll show you that picture, and maybe we'll share it later on for the other episodes. So they're still doing things together.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the tension that they can generate to get what they need.
Right.
So once they get what they need, then it's fine.
Well,
so they don't hate them as much.
Yeah. Well, they have these like hearings where they bring people in, and it just becomes performative. They're just like getting their point across to their
Absolutely.
constituents or their viewers, so that they bring in more donations and stuff like that. Which is a shame, because the normal people, me, you, Ethan, everyone in this building, we all have our own opinions, but everyone coexists. And
that's the same in the Senate and in the Congress. So it's not any different.
Well, and there are some, and like you said, I think they do all work together. But there's some, like we said, Ilhan Omar and AOC, they seem a bit more performative, to get their name out, where there's others, some that personally, Sarah McBride, she seems like someone who really, she has her opinions and her views, but she also talks to her constituents, and that's why you're in Congress, is to, promote law and discuss law and try to get it passed. It's not like they're Democrats, just because there's a Republican as the president doesn't mean that Democrats don't have a say. That's why
True.
we vote senators.
So, you have to also keep the voters in mind, right? So, for AOC, it's New York crowd, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's different than Delaware.
Yeah.
So she may need to do that to get her people's attention. So that's that simple.
Yeah.
Now the other thing is that let's not forget, guys, like the brand of the name branding. Like, so someone's name is known. Like, just give you an example. Let's see. Well, these are all the congressmen and congresswomen. They make the same amount of money. Sarah McBride, right? She is well known nationwide. So that, like, she can just call any of the TV channels anytime and then get airtime.
Mm-hmm.
There are 400 others are not able to do the same
Right.
thing. So that name recognition brand means something.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it comes with bad publicity. So I mean, you can't really just take that away. So how we get to know people is if their names are being covered in the news, in the media, in other places. So like, I don't know a single song of Taylor Swift. I'm sure Ethan knows all of them, right?
Decent amount.
A decent amount. Zero. Like I promise. I swear to God, I don't. And she's dating with a football player. I know she travels with her private plane the entire world like 100 times a year. So I know she bashes her exes
Mhm.
on
Yeah.
the lyrics, right? How do I know this? Like these are all not great publicity, right? So this is coming from that.
Mhm.
But she, sells. So that's similar in politics. Sometimes you just need to have that name. And, let's not forget. So if you just go back to what happened in primaries with Republicans, Matt Rubino, RFK Jr.,
Mhm.
they were hating Trump. Right now, they work for Trump. I mean, Rubino,
Yeah.
like Trump used to call him little man,
Yeah. Yeah.
like little hands and everything
Little Marco.
little. So, and then he now works for him,
Yeah.
and he worship him. So this is politics.
Mm-hmm.
So if he wasn't running for the primary at that time and taking those actions against Trump, his name would be not visible to anyone. So Trump wouldn't pick him. So why Trump picks him? So then he stops the future
Yeah.
developments from that, right? So that's why probably he picked him. So then he doesn't become bigger.
Turn your enemies into an ally.
So that's what it is. So this is politics. So you can't really, everything that we see out there, there's a behind the scenes story, and you cannot be too naive to say that, oh, this is what just happened on TV. No, that didn't happen. So sometimes, like, we have this in the old episodes. This little clip is being just all over the place. And then I'm like, I always said, let's listen to the whole thing, because this is not what this guy is probably saying.
Mm.
So you can do that with, our shows. So someone would just take, like, Delaware is who I am part without giving the content of it before and after. And all of a sudden you can say, okay, so he hates his own country, like where I
Right.
born and raised. So one can use that.
Yeah.
But why we say this is because we reflect today's, today, 27 years, this is my home. So this doesn't mean that I hate Turkey. That's that simple. But someone can use this,
Right.
and fine if they use it. They just need to do it in the good, credible places so we get publicity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that brings us into our next topic, which talks about public perception and trust. There has been a release of even more documents from the Epstein files, which targets several high-profile figures and institutional leaders who have since faced reputational damage or stepped down from, renewed scrutiny. Some of these are Bjorg Brendy, who was the president and CEO of the World Economic Forum. He resigned. Thomas Pritzker, who was the executive chairman of Hyatt Hotels, stepped down. Kathy Rumler, who was a top legal counsel at Goldman Sachs, she resigned. Brad Karp was the chairman of the law firm of Paul Weiss, resigned. Sultan Ahmed bin Salim was the CEO and chair of DP World. He was replaced. And then, of course, Prince Andrew was arrested for misconduct while in public office. So we've seen some distancing from individuals associated with Epstein. Do these actions restore trust, or do they kind of reinforce the perception that powerful institutions protect their own?
So these resignations and distancing can appear to show some accountability, but that's not, of course, enough. These are just what's happening on the surface. So there is a huge public trust issue now, and this did start before Epstein's, actually. People now questioning these things more and more, but this, what we have seen, and these, like right now in the United States, no one got in trouble. So, like the former Harvard president just stepped down. Well, like if you kill someone, and then if you just say that you are not going to work anymore, does that actually fix the problem. It doesn't, right? So they were part of this. I read. I can't. This week I try not to read Epstein files. Like I try not to get into it. I showed you one thing the other day. The anonymous they shared something. There's the stuff that has happened is nothing. It's extremely disturbing. Not just disturbing, but it's a huge crime. So if Ethan gets a DUI twice in a row, what happens? Right? You lose your license. And why are these people getting away with these things by just resigning and distancing themselves? Is the question, right? So it's never going to be enough. I think this Epstein file and the way that we process, last week I saw Hillary Clinton in India, in the wealthiest man in India's home. That guy was in Epstein's files. How is that distancing when she said yesterday that she never had anything to do with Epstein's?
Right.
So you were, I would just double check, okay, before now, at least this is public, right? So I would double check to see what this guy has involved, how is he's involved. So, and we are fair. We say, look, if your name being on these files, let's just make sure that's not the right way to frame that. So he gets brief, like the press briefing. So if I had some publications, so he gets that on the file. So like if you search a name, and if that's on the news briefing, so your name is on it. That's not what we are talking about. You actually go to this guy's home. This is Epstein's. You have interaction with him. You meet him. You have lunch with him. You do business with him. So that's public. So Hillary Clinton should not go to this guy's home in India. And this just happened. So then she says yesterday that she didn't have anything to do with Epstein's. How can we trust that?
Yeah.
Right?
It's, the public is outraged at, these atrocities, these victims that have come forward. And so, like you said, it's really not just having the accountability of just stepping down, but there needs to be some sort of accountability for it, and demanding kind of change. And really, I kind of think that it's kind of permanently altered how, the public views some of these elite institutions and world organizations, as they keep being connected to these files that they're releasing.
So let me give you another example from Turkey. And I wasn't going to get into this, but we have a little bit of time. So if I send you a picture, I know it's Ramadan, so some people are not going to be happy with what I'm sending, but I want people to be smarter. Like right now, Phil, Ethan, you guys don't have, the luxury of being stupid anymore. I'm not saying that you were stupid. So what I'm saying is the access that we have, right? So 30 years ago, we wouldn't have Epstein files being on the internet. You wouldn't be able to have access to that. So then you wouldn't be able to process certain things the way that you did today. So that's why I'm saying that, the luxury of not being playing stupid is no longer an option anymore. So I just sent you a picture, and if you put that person next to me, I'm not going to make any personal comments, but I can promise. So this person who's coming up now is one of the most maybe known singers in Turkey right now. So let's not put UnitedTV's on her name, because I don't want to associate with her as much as possible. So this picture. So Ethan is getting married sometime this year. So putting him on the spot. If you have daughters, do you want her to be the role model for your kids?
Probably not.
Probably not.
No.
So what about Phil? You already have kids. Are they two boys or
Two boys, yeah.
Two boys.
Thankfully.
Well, well, I can use some other pictures. So,
Yeah.
but this is not a role model, right? You know what she does? She's the UNICEF children's ambassador for Turkey.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, I control myself. I filter it. There was another picture that I was going to send you, but I'm not going to do that. Other people can go and see. This is UNICEF. That's like, how would you know UNICEF? Like a very credible organization. Well, not that much anymore, right? So this is an organization that's involved with Epstein files. The individuals who are part of it are on the Epstein files. So now she talks about Ramadan, and like there's a nicer video of her where she covered some part of her body, so we don't have to see everything anymore. And she is talking about how Ramadan is important. So this is her, children's ambassador. This person is responsible today to make better decisions. If she's not, terminating her relationship with UNICEF and doing this, like we now know that kids are being raped, being killed. These are on the file. So you can't play this dumb shit and say that, and then lecture me on religion. Okay? And then she reads this document that talks about Turkey with some very less developed African countries. So, and Turkish people were not happy about it, right? Nothing wrong with those other countries, but they're not in the same category in terms of the need. And then she says, well, they just gave me the document, so I just read it. So that means you are just pure stupid. So, and then that means you shouldn't be representing anything with kids. You should be in jail with this kind of craziness, because how do I know that you are not, part of this whole thing? Because they are using all celebrities, all other people. So if you think you are doing this, you are giving this picture, and then you have your name as a ambassador for children, then, before we get sued, so I'll stop there.
I mean, yeah. I think you're right that, kind of this distrust started, before the Epstein files. But now, especially today in the modern culture that we live in, where everything's transparent and everything's online, she posts these pictures online. You can't say one thing for an organization or represent an organization and then do something different, for your social media followers, because people will call you out on that. Right. Requiring trust, requires visible reform. You can't just say one thing and do another. And so there was an article in the New York Times just a couple of days ago where, the author asked whether the Epstein files should have been revealed at all. And again, to what we just talked about from a transparency standpoint, people say sunlight is always the best disinfectant. Release all the files. Let's see what happened here. But are there real risks to kind of this full disclosure? Or do you just think in the society we live in, people are going to find out either way?
So I would probably, we maybe talk about this a little bit last week with Jessica Needles. So the problem is, without the transparency, you can't really have a good accountability. So just like if I keep telling you guys, just trust me, but then I don't have any data to back that up, or I don't show you that, I don't give you that access, then why would you need to trust? How can you trust? Right. What I was saying, for example, maybe this guy was trying to say this, but I don't think that was the case. So when you dump 3.5 million files, they are not indexed in a proper way, so you really don't know what you are looking for. If, like Joe Biden used to say, if you are the average Joe, then you really don't know what you are doing. So I know how to navigate those files, but he doesn't. Probably Joe Biden doesn't either these days. Maybe we'll visit him one of these days. So he wouldn't be able to, not this average Joe is a different one. So sorry for the distraction. So, if someone just goes into this these files, they don't know what they're looking for. So they can take one document and make something out of it. Maybe that's what they're trying to say, but this doesn't mean that they need to be protected.
Yeah.
That's why we got to the point of today where things are out of control, because they were protecting these. So, protecting the victims and some names that shouldn't, like if they're investigating and that name is there, like some FBI agents and others, that's one thing. But people need to know that. People,
I think like Tom Hanks allegedly, I think his name is in there, but it's like they're in an email where they're just talking about like a funny movie that they watched, But if someone were to type in what celebrities are listed in the Epstein files, his name would come up, and without that context, then you wouldn't know what.
But we are not looking for the funny movies that's being watched.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking for which kids being raped.
Mm-hmm.
So which kids being kidnapped, which people under 18 being pushed to slavery, almost like they are being raped by multiple people in one day, and like the newborns being buried under some section in the island. So, and you have to really be paying a lot of attention these days, guys. So this whole newborn, like the baby skin and those dermatologic stuff that they are using, celebrities were talking about it. They're like, oh, what did you do to your face? Oh, the new the after circumcision, the pieces that kid has. So how do we know they kept the issue with that little piece? How do we know that they just produced these babies to get that piece? You see what I'm saying, right? So now maybe that's celebrity, usually average IQ is like 72. Maybe they really didn't know, but today they know. If we keep these in dark, people will have excuses to do dumb shit stuff, just like this Hadise lady. So no, they should be public. So, and then if people are making wrong assumptions, that's fine.
Yeah, and we'll close it out here. Kind of tie everything together here. When you step back and look at today's themes that we talked about: corporate courts, political theater, institutional scandals, the Epstein files. Are we living through a broader crisis in trust in American institutions, or is it just our access to information everywhere all the time has kind of opened our eyes to this reckoning, if you will?
So you may remember what I said about my mom. Like, she freaks out every day with new stuff that's happening, because we have access.
Mm-hmm.
So things were happening before, we just didn't know. I just told you guys, like 30 years ago, these Epstein files, we wouldn't have access.
Mm-hmm.
We would maybe read it in some really big newspapers, some, not a lot, but it wouldn't be available to us. But this didn't mean that it wasn't happening.
Well, I mean, a lot of these interactions happened 30 years ago. But
let's go back to Dr. Erkan's book, since we opened with that. So what's happening in 2020, 2021, 2022, and even now, what's happening in 70s? So do you think it was being heard by people in the 70s the way that it is now? Mm-hmm. So I did 4 live sessions with Dr. Erkan. One of them, they take our videos, and then sometimes it's not, on YouTube, it's not, they're not able to access in Ethiopia, like the one that we were doing that time. And then they have it in different sources they are distributing, and it hit like 1 million views in Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. So they have access now, right? So same issue, what's happening, and awareness of that was very little. But today, we write a book, we translate that to Turkish, now Dr. Erkan's translating that to Italian. Now you know about it, everyone else knows about it. So this is access. Yeah. So this access, I think the issue is how we are individuals adapting to better prep ourselves to process this information. Yeah. So that's why we need to research, we need to read, we need to take a moment and understand what's happening and just try to be a little bit smarter.
Yeah, no, because 30 years ago, if 3 million files were released, there would have been no way to see that. But now I can get it on my phone in 5 seconds.
Absolutely.
So it's really up to the people how we kind of process receiving that information, and like you said, kind of doing your own research and making your own opinions, and
That's exactly what it is.
just being a human being.
Yep.
So that's covered a lot of ground today. So I'll turn it over to you for any final thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with.
Well, we'll have Bariatric Friday coming up with Dr. Erkan, and we are going to discuss the day of the surgery. And next week we have Brian Townsend, the majority leader, is going to join us. And then that's all we have for today. So, these solo sessions are important, so it helps us to kind of go through a lot of things. And having guests is always good, but we want to be able to address certain things. And then today was one of those. And thank you for helping with the questions and the background of the issues. So we'll see you at the Bariatric Friday. Well, until then, stay united. Bye-bye.